This is indeed a campaign being fought on many fronts. And now we are due to have a view from across the North Sea from Helle Hagenau, who's well known to many of us as a long campaigner against the European Union. Helle is Danish and was working with the EDD group in the European Parliament when UKIP first succeeded in getting MPs elected in '99. They joined with the EDD group under the Danish MEP Jens Peter Bonde. She worked in the European Parliament from '94 to 2000 and was Deputy Secretary General of the Eurosceptic EDN group, which was the predecessor to the EDD. She was also Secretary General of TEAM, the European Anti-Maastricht Alliance, from 1997 to 2000, and became well known to British Eurosceptic and pro-independence groups. And she worked for a while in Britain with the trade unions against a single currency. She has a strong left bias in politics, supporting the social model and organised labour. And in 2001, she was headhunted by the Norwegian No to the EU movement, which is perhaps the best organised of all pro-independence groups. Norwegian public opinion is solidly pro-independence, but the main party leaderships are Europhile and tend to edge policy towards EU assimilation, although only 15% or so of the general population is in favour, with around 70% solidly opposed. She was Secretary General of No to the EU from 2001 to 2004 and has been head of its international relations from 2009. No to the EU produces first-class research papers and keeps the Norwegian people alive to the hankering of the political class after the first-class seats on the Brussels gravy train. Like CIB, No to the EU is a cross-party group, but very much larger and more active. Having a well-established permanent no campaign outside the political parties is a great advantage when it comes to keeping politicians on their toes. Outside the EU, Helle says, we have a democracy where people participate and politicians are accountable to voters. She sometimes feels that the British debate is too centred on economics. In the Norwegian 1994 referendum, the Yes campaign played the same game of promoting the fear about job losses. I think they promised that 150,000 people would be out of work as soon as if ever there was a no result. Nonetheless, the fear didn't work and people opted for their own democratic government. So we have a lot to learn from her and to the campaign which helped to bring that about. Thank you, Helle.
Thank you, Edward. And thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference. It's a real pleasure. I will speak about our referendum campaign in '94 and about Norway's relationship to the European Union. And along the way, I will bust quite a few myths that I've picked up from the debate here in Britain. And also, unfortunately, Kate had to leave, but I cannot stress enough what she said about talking to your neighbours, to your friends, to the people you meet in the supermarket or wherever you meet them, in the pub. I discovered the other day that one of my neighbours, my upstairs neighbour, is actually a British citizen. So I thought, okay, I'll have a word with him. And now he's a Brexiteer, I'm happy to say. So it works. It's, yeah. Okay, Norway. Norway is a very young country, especially compared to Britain. We only gained our independence in 1905. So it's not that many years ago, actually. Before that, Norway was a part of Denmark for 400 years. And then it was in a union with Sweden for almost 100 years. So you can imagine, when in 1994, the Norwegian people were asked in a referendum to join a European Union, they said no. Not surprisingly, but having this experience of unions, there was only one option, really. No to EU, we are a broad campaigning organisation, and we are campaigning against Norwegian membership of the EU. Some people are put off by our name, and I always have to explain, but I gather it's not quite a problem in this audience. So, No to EU was the organisation on the no side in '94. We had 140,000 members in a country with only 4 million people. In Britain today, that would mean 2.2 million members. So it had local branches, it had activities, regional branches, it had national structures, it had everything. I mean, volunteers on all levels, what have you. Okay, we had 4 years to build up the organization, and it was started from below, and then they got together and created No to EU on a national level, quite, I would say, contrary to what has happened in this country. With the sort of the Leave organizations, I'm not sure about UKIP. I've known UKIP for God knows how many years, 95 actually. So, yes.
93, 94 they got started.
Yeah, I know, but I've known people in UKIP since 95, so anyway. In 94, we had the farmers and the farmers' organizations, the fishermen and the fishermen's organizations, the vast majority of trade unions, and even the TUC was on the no side. Most political parties, from the left to the right, with the exception of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, were on the no side. However, the president of No to EU was a member of the Labour Party, and that was, of course, a very key and very strategic choice. And the Secretary General was from the Liberal Party. So we had a cross-party leadership. All of the above were involved. The fishermen, the farmers, trade unionists, blah, blah, what have you. Well, all of those were involved in No to EU. And so was the ordinary man and woman. And I think that was one of the keys to our success. The battle in '94, as today here in Britain, was the elite or the establishment against the people. We managed to win, and I'm very confident, actually, that you will win in June. So, okay, I'd like to give you a few examples of what was said during our campaign in '94. And I know you have already heard them in this country, but just to say you're not alone, if that's any consolation. We were told by the president of the Norwegian CBI, he said, the referendum is about saying yes or no to 100,000 jobs. But again, we were only 4 million people in '94. I mean, they say today here in Britain, you will lose 3 million jobs are connected to EU membership. So I don't know if it's a bit more to say, but it's almost the same. But what happened in Norway? Here we are. The Office of National Statistics in Norway, they did a survey after a year had elapsed after the referendum, and actually employment had risen by 11,000. So not too badly, really. And even today, Norway has one of the lowest unemployment rates in Europe. It's at 4.3%. We know the disastrous figures of the Eurozone, where you have 50% youth unemployment and 20% unemployment among adults. So, another example, we had on polling day, in one of the biggest daily newspapers, there was a full-page advert paid by the Yes campaign. And it said, if Norway votes no, the prize would be higher interest rate, the most expensive food in Europe, and fewer jobs. Okay, so 3 days after the referendum, the daily business newspaper reported, the value of the Norwegian kroner has strengthened, the interest rate is falling, and the stock exchange is surging. So, most foreign interest rates rose the day after, yesterday, so 2 days after the referendum, but the Norwegian rate fell. So we didn't actually do that badly. In 94, well, Norway has had 2 referenda. One in 1972, whether to join the common market. We had a referendum before joining, and we rejected it, whereas you had one in 75, of course. And then we had this one in 94. On both occasions, fisheries and fishery policy was one of the key arguments in the campaign. Norway has a very long coastline, and therefore, you would say, well, in my view, it's therefore we have a lot of fish. We had plenty of fish in 1972 and in 1994. And even today, we are blessed with a generous fish stock because we have a sustainable fisheries policy, unlike the EU. The common fisheries policy, the CFP, has been a disaster. We all know that. And we all know how British fishermen have suffered because of it. I think it's a big shame. And it doesn't stop there, really, with the fisheries policy. The EU has signed, because the EU has basically virtually emptied the EU waters for fish, they have had to go elsewhere. So they have signed fisheries agreements with countries in Western Africa, for instance, and elsewhere in the world. But I attended a big conference in Tunisia a few years ago, and there was a speaker, a very passionate speaker from Western Africa, a fisherman himself, and he was telling about all the consequences of EU policies. The EU pays to fish in their waters, depriving of the local fishermen of their livelihood, but not only that, not only of their actual sort of income, but also a main source of protein. And you might think, oh, they can get protein from somewhere else. But actually, when you live along the coast in those countries, it is crucial. Norway is a very long country. It's almost twice as long as Britain. I've looked it up. I didn't know. I have, thanks to Google. If you take the most southern point of Norway and you sort of project the entire length down in Europe, you come to Rome. So it's, yeah. In Britain as well as in Norway, the capital is located in the south of the country. We have the parliament, government, all sorts of institutions are in Oslo and therefore in the south. So for people who live in the north of the country, Oslo is quite far away. And one of the slogans we used in 1994 in the referendum was, "It's a long way to Oslo, but it's even further to Brussels." And actually, no, it's true, isn't it? So, we've had 3 national newspapers have carried out monthly opinion polls on EU membership. And they've done it I think they've done it since the referendum in 94, but for many, many, many years. And these polls have shown a no majority consecutively for the past 11 years. So for 11 years, the Norwegian people have rejected Norwegian EU membership. And this is interesting, I think, because it's before 11 years is what, 2005. So it was after the no in France to the EU constitution and after the nee in the Netherlands to the EU constitution. But it was before the financial crisis hit. So people tend to say, oh, it's because you are so rich and you have so much oil. But it actually changed before the financial crisis hit Europe. And also, and Edward has sort of mentioned it already, for the past 5 to 6 years, the no majority in Norway has been around 70%. So, right. As I'm sure you all know, Norway is part of the EEA agreement, the European Economic Area. Basically, the EEA is the single market, but it's also and that is important. It's also the four freedoms for goods, capital, services, and people. So it's not only sort of a place where you can go and buy goods and sell goods. But what is more important is that the EEA does not cover fisheries, agriculture, monetary policy and the euro, trade policies with third countries, and the common foreign and security policy. This means that we can manage our own fisheries policy, as I've already sort of mentioned. We can pursue a national policy aimed at striking a balance between coastal fishing and offshore fishing, and thereby benefiting coastal communities and creating employment. So we can, our fisheries policy will serve our needs, and exactly the same for our agricultural policy. We can adapt this, the Norwegian agricultural policy, the NAP, to our local needs and our national demands, as you know, and yeah. And also, we have our own voice in the UN. Increasingly, the EU speaks with one voice in the UN, not at the Security Council, but in the plenary sessions and in all committee meetings. But we have our own voice. In 2011, I was part of the official Norwegian delegation to the UN General Assembly. And I was there on behalf, I was there as an NGO representative. So the people working at the Norwegian UN mission, they didn't know I was really from No to EU. And I was sort of chatting to them, and they told me completely, I wasn't even asking, they told me that Sweden, representatives from Sweden and Denmark, several times had contacted Norwegian representatives to ask if they could submit motions because they had not been successful in the EU group of 28. And that just say, you have national governments lobbying other national governments because they've lost their voice. You know, that's a consequence of EU membership. The EEA agreement also means that Norway has to implement a number of the EU directives, as you also know, I'm sure. But if they're deemed to be within the scope of the EEA agreement. In this country, you have been told repeatedly that Norway is 75% members of the EU. That is not true. You've also been told that Norway is governed by facts from Brussels. That is not true either. You have been told that Norway pays to access the single market. That is not true either. I'll come back to all these. We had a government-appointed committee who assessed Norway's relationship with the EU, and they came up with this 75%, and this has sort of been a myth ever since. Even the Europhile Foreign Secretary at the time when this report came out, he denied it. He said that is not true, but. Yeah, and I'm very pleased he actually said that. But in general, the politicians in Norway, or the leading politicians, I should say, they enjoy to portray Norway as a country which has virtually no influence over its own policies and just obey everything that comes from Brussels. So you have repeatedly been told that Norway pays to access the single market. That is not true. We pay not a single penny, krona, or euros to do that. Norway participates in several programs in the field of education and science, and we pay for our participation in those programs, but not to the EU. We pay to the programs of course are part of the EU, but they're not the single market. We are also cooperating with several of the agencies of the EU, and we pay for our participation in those agencies. But still, again, they are not the single market. However, we pay something called the EEA grants. That's a voluntary payment, but we do it, and quite a lot of money. but that's money paid to countries in Eastern and Southern Europe, and the money goes directly to those countries. It's not diverted through Brussels. We are having bilateral talks with those countries. So Norway does not pay to access the single market. I'm following the debate very closely, the campaign very closely, and I've heard it repeated so often, and I sit and shout at the screen whenever I hear it. I get so upset. So, Norway, if we look at the total number of EU regulations and directives adopted by sort of everything, the EEA agreement as such covers about 26%, so nowhere near 75%, which is claimed. We did an actual count from the year 2000 to 2013, 9% of EU legislation was incorporated into the EEA agreement. 9%, not 75%. So we also have a right of veto. So we can actually, as Norway, veto an EU directive if we think that will be very detrimental to our country. And it has happened only once, I admit, but then we have all these Europhile people in Parliament. It was the third postal directive. So the government reported to the EU, okay, we have decided, we've had a vote, so we decided we're going to veto this directive. And nothing happened. Of course, the proponents of the directive, they argued that the EU would punish Norway if we didn't implement it, that the EU would cease to buy, for instance, Norwegian salmon or whatever, really. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. I've noticed that in the first report from the Treasury on alternatives, they also mentioned this, and they said there will be retaliation from the EU if you veto a directive under the EEA agreement. Nothing happened. The veto has been reversed by the current government, unfortunately, but the important thing is that there was no retaliation from the EU. The EEA agreement, we think, is better than EU membership, but it's still not ideal. If Norway has implemented an EU directive, and we have a few years down the line, we discover that a particular directive is not good for it. It's detrimental to Norway. The situation in the ground and in the country has changed, but we cannot change the directive. We cannot change the law that has implemented this, or we can change the law, but we cannot change the directive. We cannot change the substance. So therefore, we are as bound by directives as you are, in a way, by those who are within the scope of the EEA agreement. And also, as I said earlier, the EEA agreement is not only about EU directives and regulations, it's very much about the free movements of goods, services, capital, and people. And also, we've seen the scope of the EEA agreement is just expanding year by year. I'll give you one example of this. The equal opportunities is not as such part of the EEA agreement, but it's sort of mentioned in various EU directives and what have you. So the University of Oslo wanted to earmark a certain number of postdoc positions for women. It doesn't matter whether you agree with this measure or not, it's a principle here. So the University of Oslo wanted to earmark some positions for women, but one person thought that was against the free movement of labour. So he took the university to the EFTA court, and the EFTA court relies heavily on the European Court of Justice. And he won. So what it means is that the court in Luxembourg interferes with the policies of the University of Oslo. It's ridiculous. I'm sorry, it could happen in this country as well. Like completely bypass national governments, national parliaments, and directly goes into the sphere of a university. The European Economic Agreement, we have Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. And although we are not a very big country as Norway. We are, in terms of the EEA agreement, we are rather big, and we like that somehow. 5 million people. So we are by far the biggest country, and it is therefore obvious that if Britain were to join, if that was a choice of the British Parliament, if Britain were to join the EEA agreement following Brexit, it would become a different agreement. You have 3 small countries, and if you had Britain to join with, 65, 70 million, of course it would become a different agreement. It would not be the same agreement. Today, I think there's a fairly broad agreement among Norwegian politicians, among scholars, academics, people, that Norway has fared quite well outside the EU, and that the gloomiest of prophecies about life as a non-member have not come true. Defending a vibrant democracy has always been key to the people of Norway. It was key during the 2 referendum campaigns. Self-governance, as Lord Stoddard and others have reiterated, was key for us. And it still is very much a key argument. As a people, or as part of a pressure group, we're able to change policies in Norway. We don't have to go all the way to Brussels to do that, if at all. From a Norwegian perspective, and given our experiences in Norway, I don't think that the EEA agreement is an alternative for Britain. But of course, it's up to you to decide. But we have our experiences. Because you would, to a certain degree, still be ruled by Brussels. And whoever mentioned it, and I very much agree with that, who governs Britain is the question to be answered in this referendum. And if you, along the line, join the EEA, you're still, not completely, but still somehow ruled by Brussels. So what's the point? I'm sorry. No, my view, completely. It's up to you. I believe a trade agreement is the solution for both Britain and for Norway. We would be better off out. Vote to leave in the referendum. Thank you.